A whisper in the crowd. The annual Starlight Charity Gala had become the crown jewel of the city's social calendar. A celebration of wealth, status, and philanthropy, it drew the city's elite into one grand ballroom, their laughter echoing beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. The air was rich with the scent of rare flowers, fine perfumes, and the underlying tension of deals whispered over flutes of vintage champagne. Maxwell Thorne stood at the center of it all, a silver-haired titan of industry with a reputation for benevolence. His every move carried a practiced grace, from his warm handshake to his hearty laugh. On his arm was Vivian Decrow, her emerald gown flowing like water, her presence as mesmerizing as the jewels around her neck. Their arrival had been the highlight of the evening, capturing the attention of everyone present. But beneath the glittering surface of the gala, something was amiss. Thorne's sharp instincts, honed over decades of navigating boardrooms and political circles, caught subtle cues in the crowd. The smiles seemed a little too forced, the laughter a touch too strained. People whispered behind cupped hands, glancing nervously at the grand champagne tower in the center of the room, where a pyramid of glasses sparkled like ice. To another year of making a difference, Thorne proclaimed, his deep voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd as he raised his flute. The room responded in kind, a chorus of crystal chiming as glasses were lifted high. As he brought the glass to his lips, a commotion at the entrance seized everyone's attention. The doors burst open, and a figure darted into the room. At first, she seemed like a shadow against the bright opulence, a small girl, her thin frame wrapped in a threadbare blue dress, her hair a tangle of dark curls. She hesitated, her wide eyes scanning the sea of gowns and tuxedos, before stepping forward with determined, trembling steps. The crowd rippled with disapproval. Gasps and murmurs followed her like a wave as she moved deeper into the room, clutching a tattered shawl tightly around her shoulders. "Security," hissed a woman in a gold gown, her voice sharp with outrage. Two guards began moving toward the girl, their polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. The girl froze, looking over her shoulder. Her small hands tightened around the shawl, and her chest heaved as though she was holding back tears. "Wait," someone murmured nearby, the word laced with confusion and concern. How did she even get in here? Thorne's brow furrowed as he lowered his glass, his gaze locking onto the girl. Something about her presence felt off, not the way she stood out, but the desperate urgency in her eyes. Her lips moved, silently forming words he couldn't hear. As the guards closed in, the girl broke into a sudden sprint. The crowd gasped, stepping aside as she weaved through them, her bare feet slipping on the polished floor. The shawl slipped from her shoulders, revealing bony arms and a face streaked with dirt. Thorne's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't just running aimlessly. She was running toward him. "Don't let her near him," Vivian hissed, her face pale as she clutched Thorne's arm. But he shook her off, his focus locked on the girl as she darted closer. When she was within 10 feet of him, she shouted, her voice raw with desperation. "Don't drink it. It's poisoned." The room fell into stunned silence. The flute in Thorne's hand trembled as he stared at the girl, her words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. The weight of her statement was almost too absurd to believe, but her expression, terror and determination battling for dominance, made him pause. The guards lunged, catching the girl by the arms. She cried out, twisting and kicking as they hauled her back. "Let her speak." Thorne's voice cut through the silence, commanding and sharp. The guards froze mid-step, exchanging uncertain glances. Vivian placed a hand on his shoulder, her smile brittle. "Maxwell, she's just a child looking for attention. Let's not ruin the evening with—" "Quiet," Thorne said firmly, brushing her hand aside. His piercing gaze remained fixed on the girl. "What did you say?" The girl gasped for breath, her small frame shuddering as the guards loosened their grip. Her large, dark eyes met Thorne's. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You can't drink it. She wants to kill you." Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Eyes darted toward Vivian, who stood frozen, her hand clenching the diamond necklace at her throat. "Who are you?" Thorin asked gently, his voice softening as he approached the girl. He crouched slightly to meet her eye level. "What's your name?" "Lily," she stammered. I shouldn't be here, but I had to stop you. I heard them talking. They said tonight was the night." "Who said that?" Thorin's jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" Lily glanced toward Vivian, then quickly looked away, her hands twisting the fabric of her dress. Her silence was louder than words. Vivian laughed suddenly, the sound forced and brittle. "This is preposterous. She's clearly delusional. Who even let her in?" But Thorin didn't take his eyes off Lily. "Why would someone poison me?" She wants everything," Lily said in a voice barely above a whisper. "The money, the charities, your name. She said she'd make it look like an accident." Thorin's blood ran cold. He turned to Vivian, who now looked like a cornered animal. Her usual calm elegance was replaced by a frantic edge as her gaze darted toward the exits. "Maxwell, darling, this is absurd," she began, but her words faltered under his sharp glare. "Is it?" he asked, his voice icy. "Because I'm starting to wonder if this girl knows something we don't." The tension in the room thickened as everyone turned to Vivian. The once glamorous woman now appeared fragile, her hands trembling as she stepped back. "I don't have to stay here and listen to this," she snapped, her voice trembling as she turned toward the door. Before she could take another step, a waiter spoke up from the side of the room. I saw her near the champagne tower earlier," he stammered. She was holding something." The revelation sent a collective gasp through the room. Vivian froze, her mask of composure slipping completely. "Lies," she hissed, her voice shrill. "This is all lies." Thorin's gaze darkened. His trust, carefully built over months, began to crumble. The room buzzed with whispers, but his mind focused on one question. What had Vivian done? Lily stepped forward, trembling but defiant. "Check the champagne," she said, her voice small but unwavering. "If I'm wrong, then I'll go. But if I'm right..." The room held its breath as Thorin nodded to his security team. What they would find in the champagne might unravel more than a sinister plan. It could reveal secrets no one in the room was prepared to face. The night had only just begun. The cracks in the mask. As the security team moved toward the champagne tower, a suffocating tension gripped the room. Maxwell Thorin stood still, his jaw tight, his mind racing with questions that refused to settle. The air crackled with unease as eyes darted between Lily, Vivian, and the towering pyramid of crystal flutes. Vivian's emerald gown, which had earlier flowed like liquid elegance, now seemed to weigh her down. She stood stiffly, her posture betraying her discomfort. Her fingers twitched at her sides, and her once confident expression was reduced to a pale mask. Her beauty, once an impenetrable shield, now seemed fragile and insubstantial under the weight of suspicion. "Maxwell, this is ridiculous," she said with a forced laugh, her voice high and brittle. "Do you really believe the ramblings of a street child?" But Thorin ignored her. His sharp eyes were fixed on the security team, now carefully examining the champagne. The head of his team, a man named Carter, held up the bottle Vivian had insisted on earlier in the evening, a rare vintage he had personally selected. Carter's gloved hands worked quickly, retrieving a small testing kit from his pocket. The crowd pressed in closer, their murmurs a steady hum of unease. For many of them, the night had already become a nightmare, their carefully curated world of glamour and wealth disrupted by a single child's warning. Lily stood at the center of the chaos, her shoulders tense but her eyes fierce. Despite the ragged dress and trembling hands, she radiated an unshakable resolve. She refused to back down, even as the weight of judgment and disbelief bore down on her. Carter's face darkened as he performed the test. He turned to Thorin, his voice low but audible to the gathering. "Sir, there's something here. A substance, We'll need to send this for further analysis to confirm exactly what it is." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Vivian's mask of composure cracked further, her eyes darting wildly around the room. "This is outrageous," she snapped, her voice rising. "You can't possibly think I had anything to do with this. Maxwell, please, you know me." Thoron's gaze was piercing as he turned to her. "Do I?" he asked, his voice low and measured. "Because right now, I'm not sure I know anything about you." Vivian opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her eyes flicked toward the exit, as if calculating her chances of escape. But before she could act, Carter stepped closer, his tone sharp. "Ms. Decrow," he said, his words carefully measured, "would you mind explaining why your fingerprints are on the base of this bottle?" Vivian froze, her face draining of color. The room fell into stunned silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Lily stepped forward, her small frame radiating a quiet strength. "She's lying," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "She's been planning this for months." Vivian's eyes flared with fury. "You little—" she began, stepping toward Lily, but Thoron moved between them in a single, commanding stride. "Enough," he said, his voice a growl. "You're not going anywhere." Vivian's composure finally shattered. She turned on the crowd, her voice rising to a near shriek. "You're all fools. Do you think your money and your morals make you untouchable? You have no idea what it's like to claw your way up from nothing." Her voice dripped with venom as she continued. "I did what I had to do to survive. And you," she spat, turning to Thoron, "you were supposed to be my final step, my way out. But no, you had to ruin it." Thoron's chest tightened. He had spent years building a life of integrity, of trust. To know it had been infiltrated so thoroughly by deceit cut deeper than he could have imagined. As Vivian's tirade echoed through the room, Margaret Holloway, a respected patron of the arts, stepped forward from the crowd. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Maxwell, I've seen her before." Thoron turned, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Margaret's sharp eyes pinned Vivian in place. She wasn't always Vivian Decrow. She went by Elizabeth DeWitt a few years ago, working as an assistant to Jonathan Blackwell. A murmur of recognition swept through the crowd. Jonathan Blackwell, a name synonymous with scandal and corruption. Once a titan of industry, he had been convicted of orchestrating one of the largest embezzlement schemes in the city's history. His fall from grace had been swift and brutal, leaving countless lives ruined in its wake. Vivian, or Elizabeth, laughed bitterly, the sound chilling in its emptiness. "So what? You think I'm the only one?" Blackwell was a fool, but he wasn't the last. The words hung in the air like a shadow, a dark implication of something far larger and more sinister. Thoron stepped forward, his voice cutting through the rising whispers. "What are you talking about?" Vivian's smile was cold. "You don't get it, do you? You think this is about me. You think stopping me fixes anything. There are people out there, real power, who will make sure you never even scratch the surface." Her words sent a chill through the room. The glittering facade of the gala seemed to dim, the chandeliers casting long, eerie shadows on the marble floor. Thoron turned to Lily, who stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. "Lily," he said softly, kneeling beside her, "there's more to this, isn't there?" The girl hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Vivian before returning to Thoron. She nodded slowly. "It's not just her," she whispered. "There are others, bigger than her. They use kids like me to do their dirty work." The room went silent again, the implications of her words sinking in like a stone. The weight of the truth threatened to crush Thoron. He looked at Lily, her face pale but resolute, and realized that the child standing before him had seen more darkness than most adults could imagine. "I need you to tell me everything," he said gently. "We'll protect you, but we need to know." Lily glanced at the crowd, her small frame trembling under their collective gaze. But then she straightened, her voice growing stronger. "They don't care about you. she said, her words cutting like a blade. They only care about power, about control. Vivian was supposed to start here, with you, and then the others. She reached into the pocket of her tattered dress, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. With trembling hands, she held it out to Thorin. He unfolded it carefully, his heart sinking as he read the names scrawled in uneven handwriting. Each name was someone he recognized, prominent figures in philanthropy, politics, and business, and beside each name was a date. Today's date was marked beside his own name. Vivian, or Elizabeth, laughed again, her voice hollow. You can't stop them. You can't stop any of it. Thorin folded the paper and turned to his security team. Contact the authorities. Now. As the team sprang into action, the crowd stood in stunned silence. Thorin looked around the room, his once proud guests now shadows of their former selves, their illusions of safety shattered. The night had begun as a celebration of charity and wealth. It was now a battleground of truth and lies, and Thorin knew they were only beginning to uncover the rot hidden beneath the surface. He turned to Lily, his voice soft but firm. You were brave to come here tonight, but I need you to be brave just a little longer. Lily nodded, her small hand gripping his as tightly as her tiny frame could manage. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. The battle was far from over, but they had taken the first step toward tearing down the facade. And Thorin knew, with every fiber of his being, that they would not stop until the truth was laid bare. Unveiling the abyss. The gala had transformed into a hive of hushed urgency. Security teams combed the room for evidence, the once elegant atmosphere now crackling with tension. Guests clustered in uneasy groups, their conversations reduced to whispers, the sparkle of jewels and gowns dimmed by the weight of suspicion. Outside, the flashing lights of police cars reflected off the grand windows, a stark reminder that this was no longer a private affair. Maxwell Thorin stood near the champagne tower, gripping the crumpled list of names Lily had handed him. His mind raced as he scanned the familiar names. Powerful figures he had considered allies, even friends. A chill ran down his spine. The paper felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the weight of every betrayal and secret he'd overlooked in his pursuit of philanthropy. Lily sat on a plush chair nearby, her small frame dwarfed by the opulent furniture. She fidgeted with the hem of her dress, her eyes darting nervously between the adults around her. Despite the chaos, she remained a beacon of quiet resolve, though her trembling hands betrayed the fear she fought to contain. Thorin's security chief, Carter, approached, his expression grim. Sir, the police are ready to begin questioning. They've confiscated the champagne and are sending it for immediate analysis. I've also alerted the private investigators we've worked with before. They're already digging into this list. Thorin nodded, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Vivian, Elizabeth, seated under close guard across the room. Her once flawless composure had unraveled into a venomous glare, her eyes following every movement like a predator trapped in a cage. Keep her here, Thorin said coldly. She's not leaving until we get answers. Carter hesitated. Maxwell, there's more. We've been combing through Vivian's, Elizabeth's, records. Her connections to Jonathan Blackwell are deeper than we thought. It seems she wasn't just his assistant. She was directly involved in several of his shell companies. And there's evidence she's still in contact with some of his associates. Thorin's jaw tightened. And this network Lily mentioned. Do we have anything concrete? Not yet, Carter admitted, glancing toward Lily. But if what she's saying is true, it's massive. This isn't just a one-off scheme. We're talking about something systemic, something entrenched in every level of society. Thorin's gaze returned to the crumpled list in his hand. Each name felt like a blow to his trust, his faith in the institutions he had spent his life supporting. Then we dig deeper, he said firmly. I don't care how long it takes. The child's burden. Meanwhile, Lily watched the scene unfold, her small hands twisting in her lap. The weight of what she'd done pressed down on her, and though she tried to sit still, her legs bounced nervously. She wasn't used to this much attention. or this much fear. A woman in a sleek black dress approached, her expression softening as she knelt beside Lily. "Hi there," she said gently. "My name's Eleanor. I'm a friend of Mr. Thorne's. He asked me to sit with you for a bit." Lily nodded, her wide eyes studying Eleanor carefully. She didn't trust easily, not after everything she'd been through. "You've been very brave tonight," Eleanor continued. "What you've done, it's going to help a lot of people." Lily swallowed hard. "What if they come after me?" she whispered, her voice so soft that Eleanor had to lean in to hear her. Eleanor's heart ached at the fear in Lily's voice. "You're safe now," she assured her. "Maxwell won't let anything happen to you. Neither will I." Lily hesitated before nodding again, but her mind raced. She wasn't sure if anyone could truly keep her safe. The people behind this, she'd seen what they could do. Elizabeth's last stand. Across the room, Elizabeth sat rigidly in her chair, her emerald gown crumpled around her. Her beauty, once her greatest weapon, now seemed hollow. She met Thorin's gaze as he approached, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "Come to gloat," she sneered. Thorin's expression was unreadable as he pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "I want answers," he said flatly. "Who are you working with?" Elizabeth laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "Do you really think they'll let you get close enough to find out?" "Try me." Thorin shot back, his voice cold. "You can either cooperate, or I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life rotting in a cell." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You don't understand how deep this goes," she spat. "You think you can fix this with your money and your reputation. You're a fool, Maxwell. You've been a pawn in their game for years." "Who are they?" Thorin pressed. "Tell me, and maybe you'll get a chance to walk away from this." Elizabeth's bitter smile returned, but it was tinged with a hint of fear. "You'll never get close to them," she said softly. "They don't leave loose ends." Thorin leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Then why are you still here?" Her silence was answer enough. Elizabeth wasn't just afraid, she was expendable. Lily's truth. As the police continued their investigation, Thorin returned to Lily. Her wide eyes met his, searching his face for reassurance. He knelt beside her, his large frame folding carefully so he could meet her eye level. "Lily," he said gently, "I need to know everything you can tell me about these people. I promise you, we'll protect you." The girl hesitated, her hands clutching the tattered edges of her dress. "I don't know everything," she said softly, "but I heard them talking. At the shelter, late at night. They'd come and pick kids, the ones no one would miss." Thorin felt his stomach twist. "What did they do with the kids?" "They made us listen," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "They'd tell us where to go, who to watch. We had to tell them everything we heard. And if we didn't—" She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "It's okay," Thorin said, his voice steady. "You're safe now." Lily shook her head, her voice rising. "They're still out there. They're still using kids. They don't care who they hurt." Her words hit Thorin like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about him, or even Elizabeth. This was about countless children like Lily, exploited and discarded by a system that preyed on the vulnerable. A new resolve. By the time the night drew to a close, the police had gathered enough evidence to arrest Elizabeth. The sight of her being led away in handcuffs was both satisfying and hollow. Thorin knew this was only the beginning. As the guests dispersed, their faces pale and their whispers urgent, Thorin stood alone by the grand windows, staring out at the city. The skyline, once a symbol of progress and opportunity, now felt like a facade hiding something far darker. Behind him, Lily approached hesitantly. "Mr. Thorin." He turned, his gaze softening. "Yes, Lily." "Did I do the right thing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thorin crouched to meet her eyes, his voice firm. "You did more than the right thing. You saved lives tonight." She nodded slowly, but her expression remained uncertain. What happens now? Thorin glanced back at the city, his jaw tightening. Now, he said, we find the rest of them. And we stop this, for good. The weight of his words settled between them. For Lily, it was a promise that her nightmare wouldn't define her future. For Thorin, it was a vow to dismantle the corruption that had tainted everything he believed in. The night had revealed the darkness lurking beneath their world, but it had also sparked a fire, a determination to fight back. Together, they would face the abyss, no matter the cost. The atmosphere in the ballroom grew heavier with every passing moment. While the police questioned guests and Vivian, Elizabeth sat in the corner under tight surveillance. The weight of what had been exposed began to ripple outward. Maxwell Thorin's mind refused to rest. Every detail Lily had shared replayed itself, each new piece slotting into a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to complete. He had spent decades cultivating trust and generosity, believing in the power of good deeds to create change. Tonight had shattered that belief, revealing how easily his efforts had been manipulated. But amidst the pain, a fire burned in his chest, a determination to not let this stand. The shelter's secrets. Lily, Thorin said softly, sitting across from her in the now quiet corner of the room. I need you to tell me more about the shelter you mentioned, the place where you saw Viv, Elizabeth. The girl hesitated, her small hands tugging at her tattered dress. Her wide eyes flicked to Eleanor, who gave her an encouraging nod. It's called Haven Street, Lily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. It's supposed to help kids who don't have anywhere else to go. And did it help you? Thorin asked gently. Lily's eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. It was safe, for a while. But then she started coming around. She talked to the older kids, the ones who knew how to get things. Thorin frowned. Get things? What do you mean? Information, Lily whispered. She wanted us to listen when rich people came by, or when people at the shelter talked about donations. She said it was for the shelter, to keep it open. But it wasn't. She was using us. Thorin's fists clenched, but he kept his voice calm. And the people at the shelter, the staff, they didn't know, I think, Lily said. Or maybe they didn't want to know. She was so nice to them, always bringing money or helping with fundraisers. Thorin's mind spun. If Elizabeth had been using the shelter to gather information, it meant her operation was more widespread than he'd imagined. It wasn't just about the gala. It was about exploiting the cracks in the system that were meant to protect the vulnerable. The network unfolds. Carter returned, his face grim, holding a tablet. We've been digging into Haven Street and other shelters like it, he said. It looks like Elizabeth wasn't acting alone. There are financial records linking several other organizations to her shell companies. Donations being funneled into offshore accounts, payments to unknown entities. This network is bigger than we thought. Thorin glanced at the tablet, his stomach turning as he scanned the numbers. Millions of dollars had been siphoned away, money that was supposed to help people like Lily. And the names on this list? Thorin asked, holding up the crumpled paper Lily had given him. We've started cross-referencing, Carter said. Most of them are tied to charities or nonprofits in some way. It's clear they've been using these organizations as fronts, but we don't know how deep it goes yet. Thorin's voice hardened. Then we find out. Vivian's web. As the evidence mounted, Elizabeth's facade continued to crumble. Under the pressure of police questioning, her icy demeanor began to crack, revealing the desperation beneath. Why don't you just admit it? Thorin said, stepping into the makeshift interrogation area. The officers stepped back, allowing him a moment alone with her. He towered over the once glamorous woman, his voice cold and firm. You used me. You'd used all of us. And now it's over. Elizabeth met his gaze with a hollow laugh. Over, she repeated. You really think this ends with me? Thorin didn't flinch. It ends with whoever's behind this. And if you don't cooperate, you'll take the fall alone. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're dealing with. They don't leave loose ends, Maxwell. If you keep pushing, they'll come for you too. Let them, Thorin said, his voice low, because I'm not stopping until every single one of you is held accountable. Elizabeth stared at him for a long moment, something flickering behind her eyes. Fear, but she masked it quickly, leaning back in her chair. You're a fool, she said quietly. You have no idea what you've started. The turning point. Back in the main ballroom, Lily sat quietly as Eleanor stayed by her side. Despite the chaos around them, there was a calmness in the girl now, a sense of relief that she no longer carried the burden alone. But as the police worked and Carter's team continued digging, Lily spoke again, her voice soft but steady. They won't stop, she said, drawing Thorin's attention. Even if you catch her, there are more of them. Thorin knelt in front of her, his gaze level with hers. We'll find them, he promised. But I need you to trust me. Do you know anything else? Anyone else we should be looking for? Lily hesitated, then nodded. There's a man, she said. I heard them talk about him once. They called him the broker. The broker? Thorin repeated. She nodded again. They said he's the one who sets everything up. The shelters, the charities, the donations. He makes it all look real. Carter, who had been listening nearby, frowned. If this broker is as central as she says, finding him could blow this wide open. Thorin rose, his mind already working. Then that's our next move. Find the broker. A glimpse of hope. As the ballroom slowly emptied and the police wrapped up their initial investigation, Thorin found himself standing beside Lily once again. The chaos of the night had left him exhausted, but her quiet strength gave him a renewed sense of purpose. You did something incredible tonight, he said softly. I know it wasn't easy, but you've helped stop something terrible. Lily looked up at him, her wide eyes searching his face. Will it be enough? Thorin placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's a start, he said, and I promise you, we won't stop until it is. For the first time that night, Lily smiled. A small, hesitant smile, but a smile nonetheless. It was a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, there was still hope to be found. As the first light of dawn broke through the grand windows, Thorin knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and treacherous, but he was ready. Together, with Lily and the allies he would gather, they would face whatever lay ahead. And they would not stop until justice prevailed. The hunt for the broker. The dawn painted the city skyline in hues of gold and rose, but for Maxwell Thorin, the light of a new day did little to ease the weight pressing on his shoulders. The shattered remains of the gala were a stark reminder of the battle ahead. While the police had taken Elizabeth into custody and begun their investigation, Thorin knew the real work was just beginning. The name the broker echoed in his mind, a shadowy figure pulling the strings of a vast network of corruption. If Lily's account was true, this was not just about Vivian, or Elizabeth, as her true identity revealed, but about a systemic exploitation of the vulnerable. Thorin had spent his life building trust, and now that trust had been weaponized against him. The thought hardened his resolve. A plan takes shape. Thorin convened a small team in his private office hours after the gala. Carter, his trusted security chief, was present alongside Eleanor Blackwood, the philanthropist who had stepped forward to help Lily. They were joined by Dr. Amelia Chen, a surgeon and advocate for marginalized communities, and Vincent Ward, a tech mogul with a reputation for dismantling cybercrime networks. Lily sat quietly in the corner, her small hands clutching a mug of hot cocoa. She looked out of place amidst the polished surfaces and tailored suits, but her presence was a reminder of why they were there. This isn't just about the gala, Thorin began, his voice firm. Elizabeth was part of something bigger, and if we don't stop it, more lives will be ruined. Carter nodded. Our preliminary investigation into the list Lily provided confirms her story. Many of the names are tied to charities or nonprofits. We're seeing patterns of financial irregularities, missing funds, shell companies, and offshore accounts. Any leads on this broker? Eleanor asked. Carter hesitated. Not yet. Whoever he or she is, they're good at covering their tracks. But Lily's information gives us a starting point. If we can follow the money, we might be able to flush them out. Vincent leaned forward, his hands steepled. I can help with that. My team specializes in tracing digital footprints. We'll start with the charities on this list and dig into their financial records. And what about the shelters? Amelia asked. If this network is exploiting children, we need to prioritize their safety. Thorin turned to Lily. You mentioned Haven Street. Are there other places like it? Lily nodded slowly. There's a few. I don't know all their names, but I can tell you where some of them are. Amelia placed a hand over her heart, her expression resolute. I'll coordinate with social services and law enforcement to ensure those children are protected. We'll need to move quickly. If this broker gets wind of what we're doing, they'll shut everything down. Thorin met her gaze. Do it, and Vincent, start digging into those financials. We need to know who's funding this operation. A message from the shadows. That afternoon, as Thorin worked through a mountain of documents, Carter entered the office, his expression grim. Sir, we've received something you need to see. He placed a tablet on the desk and pressed play. A video flickered to life. The setting was dim, the background unrecognizable, but the figure on screen was unmistakable. It was Elizabeth, her face pale and drawn but her eyes defiant. Maxwell, she began, her voice cold and measured. You don't understand what you've stepped into. This isn't some petty embezzlement scheme. The people I work for, the people you're now trying to fight, they don't play by the rules. If you continue this, you'll lose everything. She leaned closer to the camera, her lips curling into a bitter smile. The broker knows you're looking. And trust me, they're already watching you. The video ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. She recorded this in custody. Thorin asked, his voice taut. Carter shook his head. No, it was sent from an anonymous source. Our IT team is trying to trace it, but it's heavily encrypted. Whoever sent it wanted you to know they're watching. Thorin's jaw tightened. Good. Let them watch. It'll make it all the more satisfying when we bring them down. Cracks in the system. While Vincent's team worked to trace the financial irregularities, Amelia and her contacts at social services began visiting shelters. The picture that emerged was both heartbreaking and infuriating. Haven Street, the shelter Lily had described, was one of several facilities tied to the network. Staff members spoke of generous donors like Elizabeth, who provided funding and resources, but also demanded access. In hindsight, many realized they had overlooked troubling signs. Children disappearing without explanation, conversations that ended abruptly when adults approached. Amelia met with some of these children, offering them a safe space to share their experiences. Their stories mirrored Lily's, whispered conversations in the dark, instructions to follow strangers, and the ever-present threat of punishment for disobedience. One boy, no older than 10, described being sent to a lavish event to listen and report. He didn't know the names of the people involved, but he remembered one detail clearly: a silver pin in the shape of an arrowhead worn by a man who gave the orders. The arrowhead became the first tangible clue in their search. The arrowhead connection. Late that night, Vincent's team uncovered something extraordinary. Cross-referencing financial records with Lily's list of names, they discovered a series of payments from an account linked to a company called Arrowhead Ventures. The company was registered under a false name, but its transactions were tied to nearly every charity on the list. This has to be it, Vincent said, his voice tinged with excitement as he presented his findings. Arrowhead Ventures is the financial hub for this network. If we can take it down, we can cripple their operation. Thorin studied the data, his mind racing. And the broker? Any leads? Not yet, Vincent admitted. But if the broker is tied to Arrowhead, they won't be far behind. a dangerous step. The following day, Thorin called a press conference. Flanked by Lily, Eleanor, and Amelia, he stood before a wall of cameras and delivered a statement that sent shockwaves through the city. For too long, corruption has hidden behind the veil of charity, he began. Last night's events exposed a network that preys on the most vulnerable among us. Today, I'm committing every resource at my disposal to ensure that those responsible are brought to justice. The statement was a declaration of war. While it rallied public support, it also sent a clear message to the broker. Maxwell Thorin was coming for them. The broker responds. That night, as Thorin worked late in his office, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text message sent from an unknown number. The message contained only 4 words. You're in over your head. The fight against the broker had begun in earnest. Thorin knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he also knew that turning back was no longer an option. With Lily's courage as his inspiration and his team's expertise as his foundation, he would stop at nothing to dismantle the network and expose the truth. As the city slept, Thorin prepared for the storm that was coming. Into the shadows. The message on Maxwell Thorin's phone sent a chill down his spine. You're in over your head. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. For the first time since the chaos of the gala, Thorin felt the full weight of the enemy he was up against. The broker wasn't some petty criminal. This was a mastermind operating in the shadows, wielding resources and power that rivaled even his own. As he set his phone down, his resolve hardened. If they thought he would back down, they were mistaken. Assembling the team. The next morning, Thorin gathered his team in the secure conference room of his downtown office. Carter, Eleanor, Vincent, and Amelia were present, along with a few trusted advisors Thorin had worked with in the past. Lily sat quietly at the far end of the table, her small hands clutching a notebook as she listened intently. We've made progress, Thorin began, his voice steady but serious. Thanks to Vincent's work, we know Arrowhead Ventures is a key piece of the network, but we still don't know who's behind it or how they're connected to the broker. Vincent tapped his laptop, projecting a web of connections onto the screen. Arrowhead Ventures is a shell company, but it's been funneling millions through various charities and nonprofits. The money trails are deliberately convoluted, but we've traced several large transfers to an investment firm called Silverline Capital. Silverline Capital. Eleanor frowned. That's one of the most respected firms in the city. And one of the most secretive, Vincent added. It's practically impenetrable. But get this. Silverline Capital's founder, Nathaniel Greer, is on the list Lily gave us. Thorin leaned forward, his expression darkening. Nathaniel Greer was a name he recognized, a powerful financier who had long avoided the public eye, his reputation built on discretion and success. If Greer was involved, the scope of the conspiracy was far greater than Thorin had anticipated. A name from the past. As the team discussed their next steps, Lily spoke up, her voice small but clear. I've heard that name before, she said, pointing to Nathaniel Greer's picture on the screen. All eyes turned to her. Thorin leaned closer. Where did you hear it? At the shelter, Lily explained. Elizabeth, Vivian, she mentioned him once. She called him the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper, Carter echoed. What does that mean? Lily shook her head. I don't know, but she said he was the one who made sure everything stayed hidden. Like, he made it so no one could find out what they were doing. Vincent typed furiously on his laptop, pulling up records on Nathaniel Greer. It fits, he said after a moment. Greer's firm specializes in financial privacy. If anyone could create a web this tangled, it's him. Then he's our next target, Thorin said firmly. We need to find a way into Silverline Capital. Breaking the gates. That evening, Vincent and his team began their cyber offensive. Silverline Capital's security systems were formidable, layers of encryption and firewalls designed to keep even the most skilled hackers out. But Vincent was relentless, exploiting vulnerabilities and using backdoor tactics to penetrate the firm's defenses. Hours later, he let out a triumphant exhale. "I'm in," he announced. "What did you find?" Thorin asked, stepping behind Vincent to look at the screen. Vincent brought up a series of transactions, each tied to a charity on Lily's list. These are payments from Silverline to various accounts linked to Arrowhead Ventures. They're disguised as legitimate investments, but the amounts match the missing funds from those charities. Do they lead back to the broker? Thorin pressed. "Not directly," Vincent admitted. "But I found something else. An event scheduled for tomorrow night. A private fundraiser at Greer's estate. The guest list includes several names from Lily's list." Amelia frowned. If that many people tied to the network are gathering in one place, it's not just a fundraiser. It's a strategy meeting. Thorin nodded, his mind already working. Then we'll crash the party. Infiltration. The following evening, Thorin and Carter arrived at Nathaniel Greer's sprawling estate, their identities hidden behind false names and impeccable credentials. Armed with listening devices and small cameras, they'd blended seamlessly into the crowd of well-dressed elites. The estate was a fortress of opulence. High walls surrounded the property, and security guards patrolled the grounds. Inside, crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom, where waiters weaved between guests offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Thorin scanned the room, noting the familiar faces. Many were on Lily's list, powerful individuals who had built their wealth and reputations on lies. And at the center of it all stood Nathaniel Greer. Greer was a tall man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. He exuded confidence, his every movement precise and deliberate. As Thorin watched, Greer moved from guest to guest, his smile never faltering as he exchanged pleasantries. "He's the spider," Thorin murmured to Carter, who nodded subtly. The secret meeting. While the fundraiser continued in the ballroom, Greer and a select group of guests slipped away to a private room on the second floor. Thorin and Carter followed at a distance, careful to avoid detection. Using a listening device disguised as a pen, Carter picked up fragments of the conversation. What they heard chilled them. "The broker isn't pleased," Greer was saying. "The gala was a disaster, and now Thorin is poking around." A woman's voice responded, sharp and impatient. "We underestimated him. But it doesn't matter. The broker has contingency plans. If Thorin gets too close, we shut him down." "And the girl?" another voice asked. "Handled," Greer replied dismissively. "She's irrelevant now." Carter's hand tightened into a fist, but Thorin placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Not yet," he whispered. A sudden turn. Before the meeting could end, one of the guests spotted Carter's listening device. Alarms blared, and chaos erupted. Thorin and Carter barely had time to react before security guards stormed the hallway. "Time to go," Carter hissed, pulling Thorin toward an emergency exit. The two men slipped out onto the estate grounds, pursued by armed guards. Using the cover of darkness and their knowledge of the estate's layout, they managed to evade capture, but not without a cost. Greer now knew they were onto him. The broker strikes back. When Thorin returned to his office, he found the consequences of their infiltration waiting for him. The power was out, and Carter's security team was on high alert. Vincent was on the phone, his voice tense. "They hit us," Vincent said, his face pale. "Whoever's running this, they knew we'd be digging. Our servers were hacked, some files were wiped, and we're still assessing the damage." "Damage control," Thorin ordered. "Lock everything down and move our data to an offline server. We can't let them outpace us." As Vincent nodded and left to execute the order, Thorin sat heavily in his chair. The broker had shown their hand, and it was clear they weren't going to let this fight go without a war. But Maxwell Thorin had no intention of backing down. The weight of the fight. Later that night, as the team regrouped, Lily approached Thorin. She stood quietly at his side for a moment before speaking. "Did you find him?" she asked. Thorin looked down at her, his expression softening. "Not yet. But we're closer. Lily nodded, her small face set with determination. Don't let them win. I won't, Thoron promised. As the city slept, Thoron and his team prepared for the next move. The broker was still out there, pulling strings and hiding in the shadows. But now, the shadows were no longer safe. The fight was only beginning, and Thoron was ready to see it through to the end. The final reckoning. The night air was heavy with tension as Maxwell Thoron and his team gathered in the dimly lit command center. The broker's network was unraveling piece by piece, but the most dangerous players were still in the shadows. Every discovery brought them closer to the truth and closer to danger. Vincent, hunched over his laptop, looked up with a mix of triumph and urgency. We've got something. A digital signature popped up during the hack on our servers. It's faint, but I traced it to a private server farm on the outskirts of the city. It's linked to Silverline Capital. What's there? Thoron asked, his voice steady despite the undercurrent of anger. Everything, Vincent said. I think it's their central hub. Financial records, communications, maybe even the broker's identity. But it's locked behind layers of encryption. We'd need direct access to break in. Thoron's jaw tightened. Then we'll go. The final mission. The team spent the next several hours planning their approach. The server farm was heavily secured, with cameras, guards, and biometric locks. Vincent would handle the tech, Carter the infiltration, and Thoron the negotiations, if it came to that. Eleanor and Amelia would stay behind to coordinate and prepare for what came next. Lily watched the preparations with wide eyes. She felt out of place among the sophisticated equipment and tactical planning, but her presence anchored them all. She was the reason they were fighting, the proof that the broker's network wasn't just a faceless operation, but a system built on exploiting the most vulnerable. As the team suited up, Thoron knelt beside her. I need you to stay here, he said gently. Lily hesitated. But what if something happens to you? Thoron's eyes softened. Then you remind everyone why we're doing this. Your voice is stronger than you think, Lily. She nodded, gripping his hand tightly before letting go. The infiltration. The server farm loomed in the distance, a fortress of glass and steel nestled in an industrial park. Carter led the way, his years of experience evident in the precision of his movements. Vincent trailed behind, carrying a compact rig of hacking tools. The first hurdle was the perimeter fence, electrified and topped with razor wire. Carter disabled the system with a handheld device, and they slipped through. The guards patrolling the grounds were well-trained but predictable, allowing the team to evade detection as they made their way to the main building. Inside, the air was sterile and cold. The hum of servers filled the space, broken only by the occasional click of security cameras. Vincent plugged into a maintenance terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I'm in, he whispered. Give me a minute to loop the cameras. Thoron and Carter stood watch, their senses on high alert. Every shadow felt alive, every sound amplified. Time crawled as Vincent worked, but finally he gave a small nod. Cameras are down. Let's move. The vault. The server room was a labyrinth of machines, their blinking lights casting eerie reflections on the walls. In the center of the room was the heart of the operation, a heavily secured server rack protected by biometric locks. This is it, Vincent said, setting up his equipment. Give me 5 minutes. But before he could begin, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Carter's hand shot up, signaling for silence. Thoron pressed himself against the wall, his heart pounding as the footsteps grew louder. 2 guards entered the room, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. They exchanged a few words before heading toward the far end of the room. Thoron held his breath, his muscles coiled, but the guards didn't notice them, and exited through another door. That was too close, Carter muttered. Vincent exhaled sharply and returned to his work. Seconds felt like hours as he bypassed layers of encryption and firewalls. Finally, a green light blinked on his screen. We're in, The broker's identity. The team huddled around Vincent as he navigated the server's files. The data was staggering. Financial records, emails, and blueprints for the network's operations. But the most damning evidence was a folder labeled Directive. Vincent clicked on it, and a series of documents appeared. At the top was a name that sent a shockwave through the room. Nathaniel Greer. "He's not just the gatekeeper," Vincent said, his voice grim. "He's the broker." Thoron's fists clenched. Greer's been orchestrating this the entire time. They found detailed plans outlining how the network funneled money through charities, manipulated high-profile donors, and used children like Lily as pawns. Even more chilling were contingency plans for silencing whistleblowers and erasing evidence. "This is enough to bring him down," Carter said. "But we need to get out of here first." The escape. As they prepared to leave, the alarms blared. Red lights flashed, and the sound of boots echoed through the building. "They know we're here," Carter growled. "Move." The team sprinted through the corridors, Vincent clutching a portable hard drive containing the stolen data. Guards swarmed the building, their shouts growing louder as they closed in. Carter led them through a side exit, but they were spotted before they could reach the fence. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the walls as Thoron and Carter returned fire. Vincent darted ahead, disabling the electric fence just as the team reached it. "Go, go!" Carter shouted, covering their retreat. They scrambled through the fence and into the shadows of the industrial park. The guards gave chase, but the team managed to lose them in the maze of warehouses and alleys. By the time they reached their getaway vehicle, everyone was breathless but unscathed. Exposing the truth. Back at the command center, the team reviewed the data. The evidence against Greer was ironclad, but Thoron knew it wasn't enough to simply hand it over to the authorities. Greer's influence ran deep, and there was no guarantee that justice would prevail unless they exposed the operation publicly. The next morning, Thoron held another press conference. This time, he didn't just speak, he presented. Screens displayed the documents, the financial records, and the emails linking Greer to the network. The world watched in shock as the truth unfolded. Greer was arrested within hours, his carefully curated reputation destroyed. Investigations began into the charities and shelters tied to the network, and lawmakers called for sweeping reforms to prevent such exploitation in the future. A new beginning. In the days that followed, Thoron found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. The fight had cost him dearly, his trust, his illusions, and nearly his life. But it had also given him a renewed sense of purpose. Lily, now safe and under Thoron's guardianship, began to adjust to a life free from fear. She spent her days learning and laughing, her scars slowly healing, as she discovered what it meant to be a child again. As for Thoron, he vowed to rebuild, not just his charities, but the very systems that had allowed the broker's network to thrive. With Eleanor, Amelia, and the rest of his team by his side, he worked tirelessly to create a world where no child would ever endure what Lily had. The broker's reign was over, but the fight for justice was far from finished, and Maxwell Thoron was ready to face whatever came next.